So I think everyone's heard of the Anglosphere, obviously.
I should hope the people living in it have heard of it.
Yeah, it's a reference to Anglo-Saxons, isn't it? And Wikipedia, left-wing Wikipedia, has a very extensive page talking all about it and how, this is a legitimate thing that does exist, and there's even a map showing Anglosphere states, which are pretty uncontroversial, right?
I mean, it looks a lot like a map of the British Empire for a reason.
It does, yeah.
It's basically the spread of Anglo-Saxon civilization and the impact that it's had, either directly or kind of culturally, demographically or culturally on these places.
So pretty much the darker blue are the ones where actual English people settled, obviously. This is not news to anyone. And the other countries are where there is
spent hundreds
cultural
of years
influence.
Of our empire.
Yeah, obviously South Africa also should be included in that as well. But you get the gist of it, right? The notion of an Anglosphere is something that's commonly cited, except if you work at Cambridge. Apparently, this is from June of 2023, but it leads us nicely on to the more recent news. Anglo-Saxons aren't real, Cambridge tells students in an effort to fight nationalism.
Sorry, just a quick thing. This feels like a headline from like 500 years' time. The English have been dismantled and they're being remembered. It's like, well, who built this amazing thing? Well, it was the Anglo-Saxons, but we're not sure if they were really real, like King Arthur. The records from that time have been lost and nobody's sure. And
it's going to be like when they find the sort of ruins of Roman buildings and they think they're built by giants because they can't comprehend how people could move such heavy stone.
This is just the intellectual equivalence of Tiffany Gomez. In the plane, she says, this... MF wasn't real. These people aren't real.
The point you can see there, it's obvious nonsense because it's an effort to fight nationalism, dismantle the myths around the identities, because it wants to, as I say, make its teaching more anti-racist. And that's true, I guess it would. If your race of people doesn't even exist,
yeah, well,
you can't be a racist in favour of it, can you?
If nobody exists, you can't be racist. You heard it here first. So to summarise what they're saying in this article, Cambridge University's Department of Anglo-Saxon, Norse and Celtic History, which their name alone is already a problem.
Defund it.
Didn't want to present Anglo-Saxons as a distinct ethnic group, and they claim their aim of doing this is to dismantle the myths of nationalism and become more anti-racist. They said this, their own words. They used the word anti-racist.
So just the thing, it's not about history, it's not about science, it's not about knowledge. What it is about political activism to get even more left-wing than we are.
Yes, exactly that. And they also aimed to show that there were never coherent Scottish, Irish, Welsh ethnic identities either, which is not true.
No, I agree with that one. No, I'm joking.
I will be talking about that because later on down the line, I'll be talking about ethnicity and particularly mine, because it's a good example of British history. And it's also worth mentioning as well, when this went on, in around 2020, because this has been an ongoing effort, 70 academics in the field signed a letter basically arguing that the term Anglo-Saxon is legitimate and that this is an issue imported to Britain from American leftists, basically.
100%. Anyone who's read any of the things, they call themselves the Angles and the Saxons. They're literally called the West Saxons. Like, that's... Sorry, go on.
No, if they define people out of existence, they're going to run out of ethnicities to say that they were racist in the past.
But that's actually what they want, isn't it? This is the end goal of the liberal ideal.
Well, it's not the liberal ideal, but
it is the liberal ideal.
We're going to do another debate. I challenge you at some point.
I will accept it because this is 100% the liberal ideal. We're all proto-humans, basically.
100% a tangent.
Sorry.
And
but this is what they're after.
It is. It is what they're after, though. And here is the more recent news. So this is Nottingham University cancelling Anglo-Saxon to decolonise the curriculum.
Look at that, 1,700 comments.
I know, people aren't
angry
happy.
Anglo-Saxons.
I'm just going to leave this picture here of these people that didn't exist. So this is the University of Nottingham doing this. They have courses in Anglo-Saxon history. And they're one of the few universities. They're one of the few universities that offer, I think, master's degree courses on Anglo-Saxon history specifically. And they're also the only university in the country to offer Viking studies courses as well. Oh, okay. I think one of a few to do the Anglo-Saxon ones. So the professors have renamed the course Viking and Early Medieval English Studies, which is just a more wordy way of saying Anglo-Saxon, isn't it?
Yeah. What's the etymology of the word English?
Yeah, exactly.
Where do you think it comes from?
And there's also an English literature model, so it's not just the history department, which was previously A Tale of Seven Kingdoms, Anglo-Saxon and Viking Age England from Bede to Alfred the Great, which already sounds amazing.
Yeah, it's great.
Was renamed Early Medieval England from Bede to Alfred the Great, which loses the majesty of it, I feel.
It's also just semantic games.
It is, yeah. And the reason for Nottingham doing this is that they were concerned that the Anglo-Saxon phrase was used by racists and was surrounded by white identitarianism.
It's just so annoying, so frustrating.
I know that.
Just defund it all. Defund it all and just get done with it.
I know I'm sort of laughing about it, but it is a deliberate attempt to erase my history in the most infuriating and cowardly way possible.
But if it helps, go ahead. No, if it helps, universities have always been this way. You go back to the time of Francis Bacon, where he calls the universities distempers of learning. They're for promulgating a faith, which is literally what the universities were founded on, is promulgating the Christian faith. Now it's just the woke faith. Right, we will create parallel institutions that will actually disseminate knowledge. Watch this space.
Yeah, but they're meant to be. They've created what would have been ways of disseminating knowledge about our past into something that destroys our past. It's become the antithesis of what it should be.
Distempers of learning. Mm-hmm. This is why the Royal Society was set up, by the way, because the universities were just totally corrupted with ideology.
Well, that's certainly the case now. So they also want to seek, and this is a direct quote here, to problematize the term Viking. And I hate the word problematize. It's such a stupid word.
Problematize the word university.
It sounds so grammatically incorrect. To make a problem of the word Viking would be how an Englishman would say it. So to claim that you know anything about what makes up English people, the English-speaking peoples, when you're using a word problematize, which is a linguistic abomination, says it all, really.
Josh, I have PTSD with this stuff. Why do you want to remind me of academia?
Oh, well, you're going to enjoy the next link then, Stelios. So I'm going to quote about the aims of the module's content itself. Teaching staff at Nottingham also ensure that module's content aims at undercutting nationalist narratives and essential ideas about nationality, meaning the belief that English identity is distinct and confers fundamental characteristics.
That's what every identity is. Every single identity does this. That's what an identity.
The thing is, no one really is unable to define what an English person is. You can go pretty much anywhere around the world and they can tell you what an Englishman is. No one has a problem with this. You're deliberately doing it for ideological reasons. You're trying to destroy us from within our own country, and it's really quite infuriating. And just to annoy you, Stelios, I don't know why there's a sensitive content warning. It's an email. But this is from York, and I believe Emma Hardy emailed them to ask whether they were doing the same thing. And they said, Dear Emma, I can confirm we are doing this at York and have hopefully removed all mention of the term Anglo-Saxon. Yes.
The ecophobia at that place is staggering.
Mm-hmm. It's also worth mentioning as well that York did exist in the Anglo-Saxon times, so the city must have just appeared out of thin air, created by people that didn't exist.
Well, they'll say it was created by the early English. And to be honest with you, okay, that's not terrible either. Mm-hmm. You know, I mean, that is at least something. But there is something a bit magical about Anglo-Saxon. You know?
Well, it's calling a thing by its name, and names are important. It's the same as why leftists screech if you call them by their actual name, because it's like biblical demons, isn't it? They recoil in pain if you actually call them by the name they were born.
I mean, what if we just start identifying as Anglo-Saxons? Are they going to dead ethnically name us? No, you're English. No, we're Anglo-Saxons.
We actually identify as Anglo-Saxons, thank you very much. So you're actually being a bigot.
Yeah, exactly. And they are being bigots. This is all out of bigotry.
Mm-hmm. And it is worth mentioning as well that this sort of thing has been discussed before. This was from September of 2023, where our very own Beau spoke to Tom Rousell of Survive the Jive, who has a very good YouTube channel, and they actually discussed a particular man that my attention has been drawn to that is partly responsible for this, and one of the people within academia that has been pushing for this from within, and that is this guy. And this is like leftist bingo, by the way.
Just queer medievalist.
Yes, so Eric Wade with Ceasefire Now, which I presume is all about Gaza, queer medievalists researching the global origins of ideas about sex and race in medieval English literature, helicopter parent to a kitty, PhD, in brackets, he, they, views my own. So that is his bio I have just read out.
Global origins of ideas in medieval English literature, which is not global, it's particular.
Yes. Everyone knows medieval England was just plugged into a global network.
Yeah. Okay, yeah. So they're gonna be like African tribes who are just like, well, I mean, I learned this from medieval English literature. That's how I know about sex and race. Sorry. Go on.
I'd like to see the Hadza reading Beowulf.
Yeah, the Maasai. Like, anyway.
So he's published things like this: What's in a Name, the Past and Present, Racism in Anglo-Saxon Studies.
Makes me also identify as an Anglo-Saxon even more. Yeah. I see.
Mary Rembrandt Olm as well is, I think she's either American or Canadian, but of Black Caribbean origin.
Right.
And I don't know why she even has any say in how we define ourselves, but there we go. And he's also done other things like Skeletons in the Closet, erasing queer and trans issues in early medieval scholarship. Seems legitimate.
So Anglo-Saxons didn't exist, but
medieval trans people did, yeah.
Yes, of course. Yeah. They are real, they are valid. Stelios, didn't you know this? And another one here.
My existence, Josh.
As black as they were before, the history of skin colour and the history of the Holyrood tree. So yes, talking about this sort of thing. You get the idea, right? And so I wanted to dispel the notion that we have any sort of claim to heritage other than perhaps Anglo-Saxon history. Obviously,
I just want to pause a second. A 12th century manuscript preserves an English homily known as the History of the Holyrood Tree. In it, 3 rods of Moses perform a number of miracles, including turning the skin of several Ethiopian men and their sons white. The Ethiopian mothers, however, remain black. Right, so is this... And this is the earliest surviving text to create a hierarchy of skin colour. Right, there weren't really... black people turned white in medieval Europe. I hate to be the person who breaks this to Mr. Wade.
There also weren't any sub-Saharan Africans in Britain, full stop, ever at that point. There is that. But
a couple of lost Ethiopians turned the hell are you?
But yes, I wanted to talk about the impact that Anglo-Saxons had on our island and our culture and around the world. So it's worth pointing out that 1/3 of our DNA in England comes from the Anglo-Saxons, sometimes up to 40% depending on where you are. But in certain parts, where I'm from, I've only got 2% Anglo-Saxon DNA. But I'm
shows.
I know, yeah. I don't
very dark hair.
I'm very, very Brittonic, is what my ancestry tells me. And it's also worth mentioning it's how the rest of the world refers to us as well. Like, here's an article I dug up from 2022. Putin says Anglo-Saxon powers blew up Nord Stream pipeline.
I only learned this the other day, and it was like, the Russians are accusing the Anglo-Saxons of doing it. I was like, what the hell is he talking about? But yeah, they just call the entire English-speaking world Anglo-Saxon.
It's just the same as Anglosphere, really, isn't it? It's just a perhaps more precise way of putting it. But people refer to us in this way. It's not that Putin wants the British people to be nationalist and that he's saying, you know what, if you people stand up for yourselves, this is better for Russia.
He's also talking about the Americans when he says it.
Of course, yeah. He means the Western powers, but more specifically the former British Empire.
Yeah.
America, Canada, Australia. It's all people sort of bound in heritage together.
But he also introduces a historical perspective into the mix.
Well, we know that Putin is certainly a student of history because of his Tucker Carlson interview, right?
But if leaders of the UK weren't that ecophobic, they wouldn't allow him to do that. Or it wouldn't sound weird if he did.
I tell you what is essential to your Anglo-Saxon heritage, and that is merch for the Lotus to store. We have t-shirts.
Yeah, the great thing about this t-shirt, right, that's an Anglo-Saxon fighting off a bunch of average quote-unquote Welshmen.
Sir, I believe those are goblins. But yes, we have lots of t-shirts. They're going to be going out of the merch store soon in relation to Islander, so pick them up before they disappear. I wear these t-shirts in my daily life because I like them. I think they look cool.
Yeah, it looks awesome.
So, check them out before they're gone. But anyway, another important thing is the English language, because the language we speak is an evolution of the language in which the Anglo-Saxons spoke. Old English is the language of the Anglo-Saxons, and I actually did a 2-part series looking at the origins of the English language, and there we have an example of Old English there in the thumbnail, and I read out examples and also read some Anglo-Saxon poetry in its original Anglo-Saxon. And it's also worth mentioning, Nottingham is the university that has struck this off.
Mm-hmm.
The ham in Nottingham derives from the Anglo-Saxon word for homestead or village. So within the name of the university itself is a vestige of Anglo-Saxon language, Old English.
Ham is going to be the etymological root of the word home.
I would imagine so,
no doubt.
Mm-hmm.
Nottingham.
Also, there are lots of examples in other place names as well. Obviously, Birmingham as well. The ton suffix in names like Brighton and Luton means town or settlement. Ford in Oxford, Bradford, meaning river crossing, which, that word ford is still used to this day.
Yeah.
Those are just a handful of examples. There are loads. It's the base in which all of the English language started with.
I mean, Churchill's, we will fight them on the beaches, we will fight them in the fields and all that. Every word in that is an Anglo-Saxon root word, etymologically Anglo-Saxon, apart from the word surrender. Every other word.
I imagine that one's French, isn't it?
Yeah, of course, yeah. It's a Latin word. We had to import the word surrender.
Well, that says it all, doesn't it?
But that's the point. But that's why the speech is so powerful, because the Anglo-Saxon words have a kind of earthiness and, rootedness that speaks to the sort of deep time that we've been here. And so
you'll enjoy the piece I've done for the next edition of Ireland.
Yeah.
I'm not going to tell anyone what it is.
All the Latin words are very airy, abstract, and ethereal.
Mm-hmm.
They'll go eventually.
There are some good French words we have.
I'm not saying there aren't. I'm just saying it's different.
I also like that there's the word for the animal is Anglo-Saxon, and the word for the cut of meat is French.
Yes.
So venison is French, deer is Anglo-Saxon.
Yeah. Pork, pig.
Yep, exactly. So another thing that's worth mentioning, Tolkien was a professor of Anglo-Saxon studies.
Well, no, he wasn't, to say the people at the University of Nottingham.
Yes, also...
Say queer medievalists.
Yeah.
Anglo-Saxon writing had such a profound influence on The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit and Tolkien's mythology that has become a modern mythology for modern Anglo-Saxons, if you will. And obviously Tolkien is a sort of behemoth of literature, I suppose you can say, and to deny this cultural staple and his link to Anglo-Saxon history is madness, to my mind. Also, there are the legal systems. We get the concept of common law, jury trials, and precedents. That's rooted in Anglo-Saxon culture. There are also still buildings standing to this day that were built in Anglo-Saxon times. This is All Saints Church in Brixworth in Northamptonshire, which began construction in the late 8th and early 9th century by either King Offa of Mercia or his successor, Coenwulf.
I mean, all of the towns in the southwest are Saxon towns, like Swindon, Cricklade, Chippenham. These are all Saxon names. They were all founded in the 8th and 9th centuries. But Alfred was defeated by the Vikings at Chippenham, and driven off into exile in the Somerset Moors. To say, well, it's not Anglo-Saxon. Well, they are Anglo-Saxons. But I mean, okay, whatever.
Well, I see there being a sort of bipartite attack here on the English, more specifically. They're denying, first of all, an ethnicity and the notion that we share an ethnicity because a portion of it is Anglo-Saxon, which I don't think does deny that. You know
what's interesting is that by compounding these all into early English, you're not disassociating people from their Anglo-Saxon heritage. What you're saying is, no, you are it now, right? You're not actually breaking the continuum. You're actually solidifying it even more.
Unintentionally, yeah. It's not their aim, though, is it?
No, it's not their aim. But they're early English, but they're still all of us, and there's still
the continuity there. They haven't severed that part.
Yeah.
But also, it seems like an attack on English culture more generally, and this, in my mind, ties into these sorts of efforts to try and erase what it means to be of English origin, be it, English as in you live in England now, or English as in you had people who went over to America 300 years. But there's still residual elements of this, isn't there? And I think a good example of this was when Connor was talking to someone on GB News who was a former Labour MP and still a Labour Party member, taking exception to him referring to the ethnic English. And my perspective on this is that, well, it's easier to replace us if we never existed in the first place, because we lose our claim to what is ours. And
what are you defending?
Exactly. And so these sorts of things, although it's rewording a few things in a few university courses, the implications for our history, our culture, and our civilization are massive. And we really need to push back on this sort of thing, because if we lose ground on this, it's going to be catastrophic for the future. I hope you appreciated that segment from the podcast of the Lotus Eaters, and if you want to see what else we're up to, you can follow Calvin's series. Here in this episode, he had Nick Tanconi, the interim leader of UKIP, and Speaker Bob from Speaker's Corner. And if you want to see everything else that we're putting out, you can also follow us on our Twitter account, where we always post links to it. Thank you very much, and goodbye.